All right, it is 12 o'clock. We'll go ahead and get started. I'll turn over the submitting people to Alon. Okay. All right. Ooh. Okay. So this is Stewardship Series. This is a multi-year educational program that we've been running, covering a variety of topics. And this time we are covering some fish surveys done on the Cedar River. So today you'll hear from myself, Sarah Hedeman. I am the Preserve and Volunteer Manager at Little Forks Conservancy, and I've been with them about 4 years now. And we started doing this program, or I started this program about 4 years ago. And then with COVID, we converted to more of a digital platform and allows for us to record, which we will be doing today.
Not at the moment, I don't think.
And then in addition to myself, you'll be hearing from Steve Volkowski, who is the Vice President of Leon P. Martuch chapter of Trout Unlimited and is also a Little Forks board member. And then Addie Dutton from the Michigan DNR, and she's a fisheries biologist. A little bit about Little Forks Conservancy. We are a land trust established in 1996. We service the Tittabawassee watershed with the primary focus on Midland, Gladwin, and Clare counties. We do programming in mostly land protection, such as conservation easements, environmental education like this one, and educational hikes and programs with alternative high schools like our Nature Nurture program. And last, we manage our own natural areas, such as the property we'll be talking about today and 4 other properties in Midland County that are open to the public for recreation. And of course, we serve as a partner in the community, being a partner, helping with all sorts of projects. And like I said, this is a multi-part series. So next session is in March, St. Patrick's Day at noon, protecting your land. So Alon, our Director of Land Conservation, will be covering what exactly conservation easements are and how to go about it. And then we have one in April and in May, covering watershed health and then environmental landscapes, which is kind of focusing on more of the urban side of things, of like what you can do in your yard. And then I'll turn it over to Steve to talk about the Trout Unlimited.
Great, thanks, Sarah. If you're having any trouble hearing me, just shoot me a chat, and but hopefully that the audio is working out. So my name's Steve Volkowski. I am the Vice President of the Leon P. Martuch chapter of Trout Unlimited, established back in 1975. We're always looking for members, so go to our website or our Facebook page, just search Leon P. Martuch, and that will be pretty easy to find. You're welcome to join us for our meetings. They're monthly. We're doing digital meetings currently, of course. Many of you may be familiar with Trout Unlimited, but we're focused on cold water restoration and education. And we do work on the Cedar watershed in particular as our main reasonably local cold water fishery. We also do a lot of educational outreach with collaboration with the Department of Natural Resources and the Salmon in the Classroom program. Also collaborating with the Department of Natural Resources on this project that Addie's going to talk about today. And we're super happy and excited to be doing that work with the DNR as we manage the riparian corridor that exists within the Lane Preserve. So that's pretty much all I wanted to say about TU. Please consider joining, and you know, if you have questions, feel free to reach out to me or any other members of the Trout Unlimited chapters, and we'll go to Addie, and really looking forward to what she has to share today. Thanks.
Thank you, Steve. So we'll go on a little background information about the property. This is the George and Sue Lane Preserve. It's in Sage Township of Gladwin County. It's currently open to hiking, fishing, and some hunting via a permit process. It's 270 acres. Little Forks has owned it since 2017, and it was previously a privately owned conservation easement held by us, owned by George Lane, a founding member of the Trout Unlimited chapter. And for that reason, that's why Trout Unlimited is so involved in this property, because they've been involved in it since obviously George. Some features of this property: there's about a mile of the Cedar River flowing through it. It's covered in a mix of forests and open grasslands. And there are about 2 miles of trail currently, and it is growing. Kind of an overview of the riparian project. You'll see on the map, the red line is the property boundary. The north half is off of M18, and then this road over here is Sheer Road, which we have a public parking lot off of for people to walk the property. TU was the Leon P. Martuch chapter was the main driver for this project, hiring the restoration company and securing a lot of the funding. Phase 1 focused on this northern half. You can see some blue and green dots, and then I kind of circled it in yellow just to make it a little bit more obvious. In addition to these riparian habitat spots, TU has spent usually each year going through the river and finding any log jams or fallen trees and making sure there's a path so it is passable for fishing. Some specifics about the project: 8 brush or log bundles were created along the banks. As you can see in this top picture, it just kind of looks like a bunch of branches clustered at the edge, and they are secured into place so they won't just like float away. But before, this was kind of an undercut bank, and by adding this, it kind of protects that from erosion. And then there are 2 log veins, which you can see one that was placed in this bottom right photo. And then I added an additional photo from online that just shows a little bit less vegetation around, just to be able to see how much a log can like jut into the river. And this kind of creates a narrower flow of the river. It creates pools and exposes gravel, which is important for fish reproduction. And a added bonus, these structures are also great for other creatures like reptiles, amphibians, and shoreline birds for perching and sunbathing. And now I'll let Addie take over and present what they found when they did the fish surveys.
Thank you, Sarah. So I pre-warned everyone that my Zoom skills leave a lot to be desired. So if I share the wrong screen to start with, I'm sorry. How do we do? Are you seeing the appropriate one and not presenter view? Perfect.
Yes.
Okay.
Good. Good job.
I also have 3 monitors, so if it looks like I'm not looking at you, sorry in advance. But thanks for that introduction, Sarah, and I want to thank both Little Forks Conservancy and to you for having me today as a guest speaker. Before I get started, feel free to drop questions in the chat. If you want to just boldly interrupt me, that's fine too. Hopefully I'll cover everything, and I'm going to leave some time at the end to discuss anything you might want. So I wanted to start with, maybe if I can advance my slides. There we go. I wanted to start with a brief introduction about the DNR's Fisheries Division structure, and then a little bit about myself. So the entire Bay City unit, which covers the entire map to the right here, all retired within a period of 4 months, starting in the end of 2019. So all of the staff is new. That includes the unit manager, my supervisor, Jeff Jolly, my counterpart, Jason Gosto, and then myself. So you'll see over on the map, the kind of purplish color is my territory, including all of the Lake Huron ports. And the greenish color is my colleague, Jason Gosto's territory. So a little bit about myself specifically. I grew up in Fife Lake, Michigan, so on the banks of the Manistee River. And I knew from a pretty early age that I wanted to be in fisheries and wildlife management. So I went to get my bachelor's degree at Lake Superior State University, and then did a pretty unique experience and went directly into my master's after spending a summer in Alaska, where I completed my master's degree in fish and wildlife management from Montana State University. Throughout the course of those times, I worked a lot of different fisheries jobs. I worked out west, like I said, in Alaska. I worked in the Dakotas, and I worked in Colorado and Montana quite a bit. Then after finishing my master's degree, I accepted a fisheries biologist position with the Wisconsin DNR, and I was an inland fisheries biologist out of the town of Plymouth, Wisconsin, which is basically in between Green Bay and Milwaukee, for 2 years. And then starting in 2020, I came back to my home state of Michigan and accepted my current position, where I've been now for a little bit over a year. So I've always had a passion for cold water resources, both professionally and personally. Like I mentioned at the beginning, I grew up in Fife Lake, Michigan, and had just a real great childhood learning how to trout fish on the Manistee River at my parents' cabin. And to this day, I still spend lots of hours on cold water resources, whether they're in Michigan or other states, fishing, and then both thinking about ways in my professional development as a fisheries biologist of ways to better serve the cold water community and cold water angling community. So with that, we're going to jump in and start talking about the North Branch of the Cedar, which I'm guessing many of the people on this call today know that it's historically been managed as a brown trout fishery, with annual stockings ranging from 2,000 to 5,000 fish every year since 1979. And before that, we actually did stock brown trout as well, but our record keeping is not quite up to the digital age past 1979. So it's a little bit harder to figure out the frequency and rate. The North Branch of the Cedar is a very popular trout fishery. It has decent access in the headwaters, especially in the Gladwin Field Trial area. And it's arguably the closest cold water fishery for the urban areas of Midland, Bay City, and Saginaw. The Lane property itself has been an interest for both Trout Unlimited and Michigan DNR for surveying, starting in 2014. So in 2014, Trout Unlimited utilized one backpack shocker. So essentially imagine putting on a backpack with a weight that's the battery, and then having a long cord and one probe to shock the river. They did an 1,000-foot station, but I want to point out that this survey isn't going to be used today to compare some data points. And the reason for that is that one backpack unit is typically used in a stream that is somewhere between like 8 to maybe 20 feet wide, so very narrow, where fish cannot escape you trying to capture them with electricity. And as a result, this 2014 survey only captured 7 brown trout, but that's not indicative of how many brown trout maybe were present in the North Branch of the Cedar in 2014 on the Lane property. It's more about the fact that the gear, the backpack electrofishing unit, couldn't capture the fish as readily as other gear would be. So instead, we're going to focus on 2 other surveys. First, a 2018 survey that was conducted primarily by Michigan DNR. Trout Unlimited members did help, but it was utilizing Michigan DNR equipment. So this was considered an initial pre-habitat work data gathering event. So trying to set a baseline estimate of all of the fisheries communities that were present. So not just the brown trout, but looking at all fish species present. We used one stream shocker unit, which I'll show you a picture of here in a little bit, but it had 3 probes. So essentially imagine one backpack unit times 3. So it's 3 times more efficient at capturing fish. We also expanded the data collection site to be 2 1,000 feet stations to try to get a broader coverage area of the stream system on the lane property. So with that, we figured with good gear efficiency and an additional 1,000 foot station, this will give us good baseline data. Then last year in 2020, we duplicated the 2018 survey. And with that, as Sarah mentioned, some of that habitat work had already been completed. So this is more of a ongoing looking at data past since the habitat work began. So to orient you a little bit, these stars aren't exact, but they're pretty close. So the yellow star equals our Arnold Lake Road station, or you can think of it as our M18 station. Essentially, we got in, we parked right at the road at M18, and we went 1,000 feet upstream, and then we shocked back, or we went 1,000 feet downstream, and then we shocked back upstream to the bridge. The blue star is what I'm going to call and refer to for the rest of the presentation as the bench station. So for those of you who have been on the property, there's a bench that's pretty distinct that sits along the riverbank. This is that bench that I'm describing, and this represented our second site. So 1,000 feet downstream from, and then back up to the bench. So I want to first start when I dive into comparing these 2 surveys, which is going to be the meat of my presentation, to give you a little bit of general survey details to think about when I start showing you the different methods and then the results compared to each other. So the surveys were conducted relatively the same time frame. In 2018, September 21st, 2020, September 16th. A major difference was the water temperature. So in 2018, it was over 61 degrees, and in 2020, it was only 52. So this is a big point, which I'll touch on throughout the presentation, but as we all know, colder water is definitely better for brown trout. The crew changed a bit. So in 2018, the crew in terms of people actually netting and shocking fish included Trout Unlimited members and DNR employees. In 2020, it was only DNR employees. Although I will note that Steve tagged along to provide basically all of the photos you're going to see in this presentation. So he was there, but was not a part of the actual shocking experience. He was there more as an observer. And then finally, the other big difference is, as I mentioned earlier, there was no habitat work in 2018, and some of the habitat work was complete for this 2020 survey. You'll notice these green and gold colors. These will be important and be used throughout the presentation to represent green being the 2018 survey and the gold being the 2020 survey. So when we go to do stream shocking events, this is what our equipment looks like. So when I mentioned earlier, imagine a boat with 3 probes. This is what I was hoping you were going to be imagining. This boat is what we use to gather all of our gear, hold all of the fish when we shock them. And it also has both the generator and all of the probes. So you can see here, myself and Jason, the other biologist, are loading the generator. So major things to think about when I talk about shocking or sampling fish. We always shock in an upstream direction, because if we were shocking downstream, the fish could probably just continue going downstream and escape our electricity field. The electricity only stuns the trout. It doesn't kill them. So it just stuns them for a period of time for us to net them and get them back into fresh water with no electricity field. And we netted all fish species that were stunned, not just trout. So this is what this stream shocking looks like in action. This picture is not from the North Branch of the Cedar, but it's the best one that I have to show what the process looks like. So you have 3 people that are shocking, each with a net, and each of them are looking into the water to try to see typically fish that are surfacing. We work up fish as needed. So we have a tub on board there that we put the fish in as a recovery tub, so they come off being stunned. And like I said before, the 3 probes is the best efficiency to make sure that fish don't escape the field without being netted. So now I'm going to start showing you some results comparing 2018 to 2020. I'm going to first start with the Arnold Lake Road Survey. So as I mentioned again, this is the survey that was if you parked off of M18. So that's where we're going to start. All of my tables and figures are going to look fairly similar. So for this one, you'll notice on the far left are all of the different fish species that were captured either in 2018 or 2020 or in both years. So the first thing you might notice is there's a lot of them, which is very true. The next thing you might notice is not all of these fish you'd think would be in a trout stream. Also, adequate point. So some of these species we wouldn't expect to find in a trout stream, yet we did find them in the north branch of the Cedar. The third thing you might notice is you'll want to look specifically at the trout. So in 2018, at the Arnold Lake Station, there were not any brook trout caught. In 2020, there was one, and it's pictured on the right. So you can see it's small, a young of year fish, indicating that this fish was born in 2020, in 2019, and was not even a year old yet. This is the only brook trout we caught, but given its size, indicating that there are larger brook trout somewhere within the system, but they're not prevalent. This wasn't a surprise, especially given that there weren't any captured in 2018. And historic surveys on the north branch of the Cedar also indicate that this is primarily a brown trout fishery in the lower sections. For brown trout, there was a significant increase. There were 33 brown trout captured in 2018 and 73 in 2020. So very, very impressive improvement. In addition, another thing you might notice is that mottled sculpin, a primary food forage for brown trout and an indicator of clean, cold water, nearly more than doubled from 2018 to 2020. So from 49 to 102. I will point out that this might not necessarily mean that the population actually doubled. It could be things like whoever was netting fish maybe could see sculpin better in 2020 versus 2018. It could be timing. It could be a lot of things. But this is a substantial increase that the general trend is that the population of mottled sculpin is trending positively and indicating that there are more there. So for those of you who might learn more on my scale, which is a visual type of learner versus a tabular format, I wanted to present this in more of a graphical version. So as you'll notice on the y-axis, we have number of fish, and on the x-axis, we have all the fish species we caught. And the brown trout and sculpin dominated the catch at the Arnold Lake Station. This is very good. This is indicative of a very good, cool, cold water, and clean trout stream. You'll see that there are other species present, but none of them are super high, and the diversity doesn't concern me. So now we're going to switch gears and look at the bench station. So again, I'm going to present it in the format that I presented the Arnold Lake Station. So pictured here on the right is one of the nets of fish species we caught during the 2020 survey. So you'll first notice there's no trout in that net. And we did see quite a bit of diversity in this station. And we saw higher numbers of non-trout species compared to the Arnold Lake Road Station. So seeing bluegills in your trout stream is not what you want to see, but there were only 3. So it's not the end of the world. Fewer fish species were caught at the bench station compared to the Arnold Lake Road Station, but still the key hitters were still in high abundance. So we did not catch any brook trout at this station, but again, as I mentioned before, that wasn't too surprising. The brown trout numbers again were extremely increased compared to the 2018 survey. So in 2018, there were 39 brown trout. In 2020, there was 84. And this picture on the right is one of those brown trout that was captured at this station. Similarly, again, to the Arnold Lake Station, in even higher magnitudes, the mottled sculpin population appears to be increasing at the bench station as well. Again, a very positive thing. So now looking at this again in a graphical format, you'll see that there are a lot more large bars on this graph compared to the Arnold Lake Station. So brown trout, creek chub, and mottled sculpin all appear to be large players in this system. And typically creek chubs are found in systems that have a little bit warmer water. So it's a bit surprising that we found this many more creek chubs at the bench station compared to the Arnold Lake Station, given that they're so very close in location on the North Branch of the Cedar. So it could be a fluke, not really sure. And it's still not that alarming, but it does mean that many anglers probably are catching creek chubs when they're fishing here on the North Branch of the Cedar versus their target species of brown trout. So now I want to combine both stations and look at the North Branch of the Cedar fish population as a whole. So on the x-axis is the number of fish. You'll notice it goes up to 250. And then on the y-axis, I think I said the x-axis. And then on the x-axis are all of the fish species. Again, the green bars are for 2018 and the gold bars are for the 2020 survey. So it's very, very good to see that brown trout and mottled sculpin, when you combine all of the data, are the heaviest hitters or making up the most biomass in the stream, indicating that the brown trout population is improving and trending in a positive direction, and that the mottled sculpin population is also trending in a positive direction. Now I want to focus in and look just at brown trout. So again, this is both the bench station and the Arnold Lake Station combined. And this is specifically looking only at the number of brown trout, which is on the y-axis. And then on the x-axis is the total length of each fish in an inch bin. So what that means, if you focus in for a second on the 10-inch bin, right in the middle here of the graph, the 10-inch bin means that a brown trout could be 10.0 inches all the way to 10.9 inches. So long as the brown trout measured 10 point something, it was put into this bin. Again, the green bars represent the 2018 fish and the gold bars represent the 2020 fish. So you'll see in 2018, it was fairly even. There were no 2-inch fish present, but there was 3 and 4 inch brown trout present, and then a gap of 5, 6, and 7, not many, and then it picked up a bit around 9, 10, and 11. Whereas in 2020, we saw tons of 3 and 4 inch fish. So not the fish you're targeting, but indicating that there's very good natural reproduction of brown trout present. And in order to really get an understanding of age and growth, so being able to say, are these brown trout age 0, age 1, age 2, or age 3? We went through and did an age and growth analysis of brown trout in the North Branch of the Cedar at the Lane property. I will point out that because age and growth analysis is statistically more significant and has more power with more samples, we combined both the bench station and the Arnold Lake stations together in order to get a larger sample. So the process to complete an age and growth analysis is fairly simple. You take scales. So pictured here on the right, you'll see that Ryan is utilizing basically a simple pocket knife, which is the preferred method, although you can use other things. And he's about level with the dorsal fin. And he's going to, if this was a video, he would be placing the tip of the knife just along the flesh of the brown and scraping gently to remove a slew of scales. And the reason that we take them there is they provide the clearest identification of aging analysis compared to if we wanted to take them, say, around the tail, it would be much harder to read those scales. So scales are taken from 10 individual brown trout in each inch group. So regardless if they're all 2.5 inches or they're 2.0 or 2.9, we take 10 individual brown trout and take scales from them in each individual inch group. Once we take the scales, we put them, we dry them, and then we take them back to the laboratory and we observe them under a microscope to count annuli, similar to counting rings on a tree in order to figure out how old a fish is. So trout scales are incredibly small and very, very hard to get good pictures of. So for this presentation, this is actually a picture of a walleye scale because you can see the definition within the scale much clearer than you could on a trout scale, just given the size of scales of fish. So you'll notice right off the bat that there's nothing easy about aging something that looks like this. There's a ton of lines and you're not really sure what you should count as a annuli, indicating a year of growth, and what you should count as just a growth spurt, which is a real thing. So similar to children, trout grow very well, fish in general, but trout for sure grow a lot when they're young and not so much when they're old. So for this example here, this fish is actually 7 years old. So I've laid out, hopefully you can see there's some small white circles that have either a letter or a number associated with them. And you'll notice that A and B are actually what start the age and growth analysis if you were to go from the bottom or center of the scale moving towards the top or far right. Those are just growth spurts of this fish. So that's not even a year, but can be confusing when you're trying to age a fish. So imagine doing this. This is a walleye again. Now imagine doing it for a trout, which has scales that are arguably 2 to 3 times smaller than a walleye scale. So given all of that background, now I'm going to show you the aging growth data for brown trout in the North Branch of the Cedar. And remember, I combined the bench site and the Arnold Lake site together in order to get a more robust data set. So same as the rest of the presentation, the 2018 data is in green and the 2020 data is in gold. So the first thing that you'll notice is there weren't any fish over age 5. This isn't surprising. Trout don't live that long, especially in smaller systems. In terms of stream trout, you typically will get them to live the oldest and longest when they are in large river systems. Think the Osabo or the Big Manistee, or systems like that that have large amounts of both water, velocity, water in general, volume of water, but also very diverse cover and typically a very simple fish community present. So there's not a lot of fish species present. So most of the brown trout in the North Branch of the Cedar were between ages 0 and age 3. The first thing I really want to draw your attention to is the age 0 bars. So as I mentioned in the beginning of this talk, the DNR does stock currently 2,000 brown trout every single year into the North Branch of the Cedar. They're not stocked at the lane property, but they're stocked close enough in proximity that if the fish wanted to be in the riparian section of the North Branch of the Cedar on the lane property, they easily could swim there. It's not too long of a distance. So without having to make an assumption about whether fish were from stocked or natural origin, I can say with 100% certainty that all of these brown trout on the 2 bars that are under age 0 are all from natural reproduction. And the reason I can do that is because we don't stock fish that are any smaller than 5.5 inches, and they are approximately almost a year old when they're stocked, because brown trout spawn in the fall and we don't stock them until the following spring. And this sampling was collected in September. So by that time, all the stock fish would be a minimum of 1 year old, and they would be substantially larger than 3 or 4 inches. So in 2018, there was a decent number of natural reproduction, so small brown trout, but in 2020, that number dominated the population, indicating that your habitat project is working. There's clear, cool gravel present and spawning is occurring. Now, the next kind of cool thing to look at is in 2018, the fish that were age 0, so again, naturally reproduced fish, would be 2 years old in 2020. Given that the surveys were 2 years apart, the fish would grow 2 years. And you'll notice that the drop off from the green bar on the far left to the gold bar underneath the second yellow arrow is very minimal. So if I make the assumption that those naturally reproduced fish that were sampled in 2018 survived 2 years and now they're 2-year-olds, that is very good survival. Now, obviously, I know, and I'm sure many of you know, that these are probably not all identically the same fish that we sampled in 2018 that we just magically sampled again in 2020. But looking at the proportion and knowing of how many fish were captured in the 2018 survey to how many were captured in the 2020 survey, this is very promising. And it indicates that a lot of these fish that are born in the North Branch of the Cedar are surviving. The other thing to take away from this graph is we would really like to know if fish are from stocked or natural origin. So again, anything that's age 1 or larger, I can't say. I could make some assumptions, but I can't actually tell you. So that's something that we'll revisit in the conclusions, and it's something we might want to target moving forward. So now I wanted to compare the aging data at the North Branch of the Cedar to the statewide averages. So how does the North Branch of the Cedar brown trout line up when I compare it to statewide brown trout growth? So I'm going to show you a series of tables that all look the same. On the left-hand column is going to be the age of the brown trout. The next column will be the number of brown trout aged per year. So this first table is 2018. The next column, or the third column, is the average length of all of those fish. So for example, the 21 brown trout that were aged at age 0 averaged 3.9 inches in length. And the final column is the state average length for age 0 brown trout. So as you can see, ages 0, 1, and 2 for brown trout captured in 2018 were growing very similar, if not slightly higher than statewide averages. However, ages 3, 4, and 5 were growing lower than statewide averages. And as a result of this, the entire index, so we use a growth index to compare how fish are growing in a stream compared to statewide averages, was approximately negative 0.2, meaning that they were growing just slightly slower than statewide averages. Whereas in 2020, you'll notice that ages 0, 1, 2, and 3 were all growing faster than statewide averages. Age 4 was growing slightly slower, but there was only 4 fish, and they were not that much slower. This together indicated that the North Branch of the Cedar brown trout were growing nearly an inch faster or an inch higher in the standard growth rate index compared to statewide averages. So in conclusion, natural reproduction of brown trout in the North Branch of the Cedar has increased. We can show this both through our age and growth data and also knowing that we do not stock any fish that are less than 5 inches in size. So this is a win. This is a very big deal. Second, brown trout are growing faster and above statewide averages. So typically anything that's between a negative 1.0 to a positive 1.0 on the growth index is kind of a wash. The fact that there is a positive trend going from negative 0.2 to a positive 1.0 on the mean growth index means that I think there is a lot of promise that the brown trout populations are going to continue on this positive trend, increasing growth rates, and also increasing the population abundance within the North Branch of the Cedar. The water temperature was lower, nearly 10 degrees lower. Now, the exact reason for this, it's unknown, and I can't say or pinpoint why that would be. I can give you some reasons. First, I could say, well, maybe it was a faulty reader, faulty thermometer. So maybe we didn't use the same thermometer in 2018 as we did in 2020, but I'm not going to think that. I'm going to think that this was a positive based on a few things. Maybe it's a positive based on the cover, so in terms of riparian cover along the banks. Maybe it's a positive because the brush bundles are doing their job. So instead of having a wide, shallow area of the river that's getting a lot of sun impact to it, which is causing it to warm over time, instead the brush bundles are narrowing the stream, making it deeper and having less sun impact on the stream temperature. Or maybe it's something else. But for whatever reason, the water temperature being lower was an extreme positive. So moving forward, Michigan DNR Fisheries has a few management recommendations. The first, I think that we, meaning the Michigan DNR, should continue stocking brown trout at a rate of 2,000 per year, split between 2 locations. The reason behind this is, although the natural reproduction on the Lane property is increasing, the North Branch of the Cedar receives heavy fishing pressure. It receives fishing pressure from both fly anglers and what I would describe as either live bait or spinner anglers who are possibly fishing because they're hoping to take home some dinner. So based on the high fishing pressure, whether it's catch and release or harvest fishing, I don't think that the current rate of natural reproduction of brown trout can support this high level of fishing pressure. And just to be clear, the fishing pressure is a good thing. That means that people are utilizing this resource and they're out enjoying the property, not only on the Lane Preserve, but the North Branch of the Cedar. So I encourage the fishing pressure. And by stocking these fish, we can continue to ensure that there's an enjoyable time had by all. Second, I would like to consider fin clipping all stocked brown trout for future assessments. So what this would look like is when the brown trout would come to the streams, or possibly this would occur at the hatchery, we would clip one of their fins, probably a ventral fin because it's not as important for swimming. But by clipping it, that clip would remain its entire life. And so whether that fish was 5 inches long or 20 inches long, I would be able to tell definitively if that fish came from a hatchery or if it actually originated in the North Branch of the Cedar. This would allow us to have more in-depth analysis into the future moving forward in terms of management of brown trout in the North Branch of the Cedar. Third, as time and budget allows for us at Michigan DNR, you saw how large the coverage area is for myself and my colleague. We would like to continue evaluation of natural reproduction within the North Branch of the Cedar, and also continue the evaluation of the habitat work that Trout Unlimited is having, that is completing on the Lane property. So this is really a subject that's hard, especially in my area. I have a lot of cold water trout resources. I manage the entire Rifle River watershed and the entire East Branch of the Augray and Main Stem Augray River systems, which have large quantities of cold water resources. So trying to fit in how we can do this, I think it should be able to happen. I don't think we'll be back in 2021, but possibly in 2022 or 2023, just to have a one-day check-in, similar to like we did this year. And then fourth, I think that TU should continue their habitat work. I think that the overall general trends are all positive. There wasn't any kind of negativity that I could find comparing 2018 to 2020 within the brown trout population within the North Branch of the Cedar. The water temperature was colder. The population abundance in terms of number of brown trout there was higher. The level of natural reproduction was higher. And arguably the condition of the fish could have increased as well. We don't take data on that, but none of the brown trout that we handled are what I would describe as underweight or sickly looking. So I think the habitat work is really having good positive benefits, and everyone on the call who's been involved should pat themselves on the back. And with that, I think I left about 15 minutes for questions, discussions, and I can stop sharing my slide or my screen here.
Yeah, this is Tom Monto. I have a question on, we used to have temperature loggers on the Lane property, and a couple years ago it got wiped out by high water. Is any possibility, or do you know if the difference between the temperatures on the two shocking dates was due to, like rain or a period of warm weather prior to the shocking versus, the two different times?
So I can't quite speak for what the weather was like in 2018, but in 2020, it was warm. I would say Steve went with us. Everyone was in short sleeves. I started the day in a sweatshirt, but I'm just weird. I mean, it was plenty warm. It hadn't been cold or anything of that nature. And I don't think it had really rained leading up to the survey. So like I said, it could be because of some weather influences, but having a temp logger, like a hobo reader in, would obviously be the best way to determine if temperature readings have actually changed.
Okay, well, we can certainly reinstall the loggers. We have them, we just don't have them back in the river.
Okay, that would be awesome. I'm fully
Uh,
in support of that.
Okay, also, we have 6 of them, and
Okay.
we had them in different sections, and we would like your opinion as to, we'll put one on the Lane property and where we should put the other ones.
Okay, I can easily find 6 locations for those temp loggers, especially because we have a upcoming project. I think I saw Bruce Barlow maybe join the call, but a habitat between Fisheries Division, Wildlife Division, and Forestry Division to do a culvert replacement in the headwaters area. So I think that looking at temperature data pre and post that could be very interesting as well.
Okay, let us know.
Okay, I'll send Steve an email. Does that work?
All right, yep, that's fine, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
So Addie, I put a question in the chat, but I'm not sure if we'll pick those up as readily. Your thoughts on brook trout in the Cedar, is that just really an unlikely possibility to get any significant brook trout populations established there because of how warm that fishery is? Or are there other sections of the Cedar where brook trout do show up, or is it really just heavily dominated by brown trout versus brook trout?
Yeah, so we haven't done a lot of other surveys on other parts of the Cedar recently. From the past data that I've looked at, but obviously wasn't a part of those surveys, the water temperature is the #1 driving factor why I don't think brook trout can survive. It gets too warm, especially in July and August. The temperatures just, their thermal regime is so much smaller than brown trout. And I think also the inability to escape warm water to find cool water refugia is not present in the Cedar. So that, for example, there's not like a spring pond that they could swim up to or some very cold tributaries. That being said, the very top upper headwaters could possibly support brook trout, and we haven't been back recently to check it out and see if there are any there. But I don't think brook trout, especially with climate change and the next 20 to 25 years of predicting what water temperatures are going to look like, I don't think that brook trout will have a stronghold. And as most of you are well aware, having good populations of brook trout and brown trout co-associating in small streams doesn't normally happen because brown trout are just too ferocious of predators.
Great, thanks. Hey, just another quick follow-up. I really like your idea of trying to differentiate stocked versus wild fish, or naturally reproducing fish, I should say, on this. You mentioned the fin clipping. Would that help tremendously if TU or Little Forks Conservancy could step up some volunteers to do fin clipping during stocking, or is that really just something that the DNR will figure out on their own? Because I think we could probably rally some people to do that if that was a limiting factor in doing that, because I think that's a great idea and I'd love to see us do it.
Okay. Yeah, I would say, so COVID makes things really difficult. We can't do like any kind of volunteer on our surveys or fin clipping unless they're spelled out by name. And so I would say during the COVID era, which is what I've started calling this, I think if it will happen, it'll have to happen at the hatchery by DNR personnel only. That being said, and that's actually why for the fish that are going to come in 2021, I didn't even request them to be clipped because I was just like, this is a low priority. I think that fish going into like the Great Lakes are more important, for example, and my 2000 brown trout, I'm not going to be able to justify, a high warrant. That being said, post-COVID pandemic era, I really think that there could be some flexibility. So for example, if we had the fish stocked into net pens on site and then used like clove oil to knock them out, flipped them, and then held them back in the net pens until they were good to go. I think that could be an option. So if there's volunteers and folks who would be interested in that, I mean, 2,000 brown trout will take not very long. Then I think if there's support, then I'll definitely start in 2022 trying to find the resources to do that.
Great. Let's keep in touch on that. I think that'd be fun to work on together.
Okay, that sounds good. Any other questions for me?
Yes, I do have another question. This is Tom Monto again. We publish a monthly newsletter. Is there any way we can get some of the information you presented that I can put in our newsletter?
Absolutely. And I'm going to forget what chapter of TU it is, but they are based in Bay City. They have a newsletter as well. And I actually just wrote an article for them. So if you want me to write an article with this, like write something up for the newsletter, I'll do that too. I typically need a couple weeks of wiggle room to do it, but I will do it.
That'd be fine. We just put out our March one, so that would come up for April would be great.
Okay. What's the timeline, Tom?
I usually publish it just at the end of the month. I try to get the newsletter up before the month shows up. So in other words, this one here I did yesterday for March, only because I had enough information for it. But I can go right to the last minute. There's no problem there.
Okay, so I have a little bit of time. I can certainly write you something up if you want to just offline. We can discuss length and what you're looking for. I'd be happy to do that. And on that note, I didn't mention, but the presentation that I gave today has an accompanying, basically it's a fisheries, all of our fisheries surveys that we do at DNR have a written report associated with them. So this survey has a written report accompanying it. It hasn't went through all of the ranks in order to be approved for public distribution. But when it is, if anyone would like a copy, I'd be happy to send it along to anyone as well.
Yeah, we would like a copy. Yes.
Absolutely.
Thank you. A great presentation. Thank you.
Thanks.
I guess one thing else I'd like to plug while I have folks on the call today is we do have the Cedar River Watershed Steering Committee that's been really active, focusing on both habitat improvement projects within this watershed. So if folks want to get involved more, reach out to Little Forks or the Martuch chapter. But we have spent a lot of energy and time, and a lot of this good work was done by the Martuch chapter, surveying those road stream crossings and where that need is to improve passage for those, the trout that are being stocked and the trout that live there. Maybe I'll ask Addie a little bit if there's how those smaller trout focus on, because I know upstream of the Lane property, there's a Renus Road crossing that we've looked at quite a bit of that, how much of a barrier that can be to get those fish from there all the way up into the field trial area.
Yeah, so I'm not super familiar with what that road crossing looks like. Is it perched?
It's not perched, and feel free to any other TU members that know it way better than I do. It's not perched, but I think it has velocity issues and there's some angle issues. There's actually a perch culvert to the west of there that goes up to a little tributary, but really it's more of a velocity.
Yeah.
Which crossing are you talking about?
Renus Road and around Shearer, Tom, just upstream of the Lane property.
Okay, yeah, it's a flow issue there.
Yeah, so smaller, especially young of year trout are the most susceptible they're the weakest swimmers, obviously based on their size. So that could have an impact for sure. And like I said, we just don't have really good recent survey data to look at the watershed as a whole. But I'm all about looking at impediments to fish passage. And also sculpin is another species you would want to pass. And their skills are not that great either. So I would say you want to pass sculpin just as much as you want to pass young of year brown trout or stocked brown trout. So I'd be happy to look into that some more. And that's the same with the 3 pipes that's going to be replaced up in the field trial area.
This is Terry Brockhoff. I'm new to these webinars that you're having. And I was born and raised in the northern part of Gladwin County, pretty familiar with the trial area and over on the Sugar River where Sugar Springs is now. I fished as a youth on the Sugar River, which had a lot of brown trout in it before the dam went in and the two lakes were created and so on. The Sugar River above Sugar Springs, is that still natural brown trout spawning area?
So we haven't been above in probably 15 plus years. We've sampled below the reservoirs, and as you pointed out, there's not brown trout, it's too warm. But that's definitely an area I could add to our list to try to fit in and see.
Okay.
Sorry that that's an unsatisfying answer.
I did fish below Eagleson Road, the bridge there, a few years ago with a friend, and we've caught some brown trout that far south. And I don't know about areas where the river comes through by below Wiggins Lake toward Gladwin and so on. What is the river like down there? Is there still some stocking going on there north of Gladwin?
You're talking back on the Cedar now?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, we stock at Sage Road, and I don't know what the other road crossing is. I think it might be Bard.
It's barred.
Okay. So we know that fish can go downstream, but pretty much near the impoundment for Wiggins, it gets warm. They can tolerate it, but they can't stay there full time. So they can come and go type of deal.
There was about 10 years back in the 50s where fish were stocked just off Oberlin Road, north of Gladwin, say up to Chapel Dam and Chapel Dam Road Bridge. And that area was reserved for teenagers to fish in for a period, about 10 years there that I know of, that I fished. And just a comment about some older stuff.
No, that's really cool. Thanks for sharing.
Yep.
All right, Sarah, well,
Addie,
yes,
Addie, can you hear
Yep,
me?
I can.
This is Keith Brooks. Okay, good. This is Keith Brooks. I'm actually a biologist with the Olin Corporation in Midland. Not that that has anything to do with this, probably other than my interest in this, but friend of Little Forks, volunteer for Little Forks, and bought some property from Little Forks. So I just had one question about the brook trout that you found in your survey. I believe it was in 2020. Did you say that it was small and probably naturally reproduced?
Yes, so it was absolutely naturally reproduced. It was probably 3 inches long. It was the only one, and I can actually tell you pretty clearly about, there's a island, and there was this tiny little like trickle of water, I don't know, 20, 25 feet wide, and it was in there. So it was 100% naturally reproduced. It was an age 0, meaning it was born in fall of 19. That was the only one, and I don't think we missed any.
Yeah, just a quick comment on that.
So where would you, yeah.
I was just going to comment because Elon and I were on the 2018 shocking survey, and we caught the brook trout that we caught in 2018. I was super stoked about that. It was a beautiful fish. It was about, I think it was about an 8 or 9 inch brook trout, and it was just really healthy looking. So that's kind of why I asked the brook trout question. But I agree totally with what you said, Addie. It'd be a stretch, but maybe you get lucky. It's like a stumble upon one once in a while. And I do think there are some cooler sections too. So, but I just wanted to comment on that 2018 fish. It was really nice.
Yeah. So Addie, if you can hear me again, this is Keith.
Yep.
So where would you suspect that there's adult brook trout that are breeding enough to have one or two in the system? I mean, there's got to be some more mature fish that are breeding. Would that be somewhere possibly in a tributary off of the river? Or, I mean, what would you think? There's got to be adult brook trout breeding somewhere if you're getting what you know, even if it's only one. I mean, there's breeding going on somewhere.
Yeah, I would say my best hypothetical guess is the very headwaters of the North Branch, and the fish are washing down, mainly because brook trout don't have to be that big to be sexually mature. 6 and 7 inch. I mean, the size limit for
Mhm.
harvest is 7. So most of the fish at 7 inches
Right.
are sexually mature. So that would be my assumption. That's my best biological guess,
Okay.
but I don't actually have data to support that.
So where exactly is the headwaters? How far north does that go?
Are you familiar with the Gladwin field trial area?
I don't believe so, no.
Steve or Bruce, do you think one of you guys could best explain that?
Sure. I think if literally if you just Google that, the field trial area up in Gladwin County, you'll be able to find a map to that area. There's improved grouse habitat and some of the stream that flows through that area. Harley and I, another TU member, we did some stream work up there a number of years ago, and we were really surprised how many brook trout we saw up there. So I do think there are some brook trout, as you said, Addie, at the headwaters. Don't have a lot of data on it,
Okay.
but they're there, I'm pretty sure.
So I think I saw a sign for the field trial area on M18 heading north towards Prudentville. So that's where you're talking.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or if you
Okay.
go up Chapel Dam Road, it dead ends on the east side of the field trial area. And when you turn in to that field trial area, you'll within first couple 100 yards cross a stream, which is part of the headwater of the Cedar River. That would be the east side of the field trial area going up Chapel Dam Road from M18.
Okay. Thank you very much, Addie. Great presentation, very interesting. Hoping to retire from my role at Olin in the next 5 years and looking forward to doing some volunteer work. Hopefully by then we're out of the COVID era, as you call it, and looking forward to meeting more people in the group.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining today. So Sarah,
You're
I
welcome.
hate to be
Thanks.
rude, but I'm gonna have to cut everyone a little short because I have to go to a 1 o'clock meeting.
No, that's okay. I was just about
Okay.
to wrap things up myself.
Perfect. And
Um,
feel free to share my contact information with anyone who wants it.
Yes, will do.
Thanks for having me, all.
Yeah, thanks for doing that. Thanks everyone for
Thanks,
joining
Addie.
us today.